The girl's hands were small, delicate and trembling as she clutched the square object she had stumbled upon that morning. Her skin, a pale azure that shimmered faintly in the light, bore the grime of the streets, and her patched tunic barely shielded her from the chill. The wallet was heavy for her size, filled with metallic credits and strange cards etched with human writing she couldn't understand. She held it tightly, though not for herself. Something deep inside whispered that it wasn't hers, and returning it was the right thing to do. Even in hunger, even in loneliness, her heart clung to that fragile thing called honesty. The street around her buzzed with noise, vendors shouting prices, patrol drones gliding overhead, and passers-by who didn't spare her a glance. To most, she was invisible, just another abandoned alien child lost in a human-dominated city. But today she carried something that mattered. Her wide silver eyes darted from face to face as she tried to recall the man who had dropped it. She remembered his clothing, a thick black coat with golden trim, his voice stern but weary, and the entourage of armored guards surrounding him. He was no ordinary man. He carried the weight of power on his shoulders. Every step she took felt heavier than the wallet itself. The child knew that approaching a man like him could be dangerous. Street kids were often chased away, sometimes beaten, always dismissed. And she was not even human. Her pointed ears and shimmering hair marked her as different, a reminder of the fragile peace between her kind and the people who ruled here. But hunger gnawed at her belly, and though she could easily sell the wallet and eat for a month, something inside told her that doing so would crush a piece of her soul that she couldn't afford to lose. The government complex loomed at the end of the avenue like a fortress carved of steel and stone. Tall banners fluttered, their emblems catching the wind, and guards stood at every entrance. She hesitated, clutching the wallet tighter, fear twisting in her chest. To them, she was nothing more than a filthy alien street rat. But she took a breath and shuffled forward, her small feet echoing against the stone. With each step, her heart beat faster, telling her that if she faltered now, the wallet would never reach its rightful owner. The guards noticed her immediately. "Stay back," one barked, lifting his weapon. She froze, wide-eyed, like a mouse cornered by wolves. Her lips trembled as she held out the wallet in both hands, as though it were a shield against their suspicion. "Please," she whispered in broken human speech. "Give to him. His." The words were rough, awkward, but her sincerity shone through the stammer. The guards exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unprepared for this. Few would have expected a child, especially an alien child, to walk up to the gates with such intent. Behind the guards, a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, his coat trimmed with symbols of authority. His presence was commanding enough to silence even the bustling street behind her. This was the man, the diplomat, the one whose wallet she now held out in her trembling hands. His sharp eyes fell on her, and in that single moment, time seemed to freeze. He did not look at her with disdain as so many others had. Instead, there was a flicker of curiosity, even disbelief. He stepped closer, his boots striking the ground with deliberate weight. She lifted the wallet higher, her tiny arms quivering. "Yours," she said, her voice fragile but clear. The diplomat stopped before her, studying her closely, his eyes narrowing as he reached for the object. His fingers brushed against hers, and she flinched at the unfamiliar warmth of his touch. For a heartbeat, their worlds collided, his steeped in power and privilege, hers sunk in hardship and hunger. When he opened the wallet and confirmed its contents, the guard stiffened, expecting him to scold or dismiss her. But he did not. He simply looked at her as though she had just done something unfathomable. "Where did you find this?" His voice was deep, resonant, carrying authority that could bend men to his will. She lowered her gaze, her white hair falling into her eyes, and whispered, "Street, dropped." Her accent mangled the words, but the truth in them was undeniable. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then slowly his hand lowered, and he placed the wallet inside his coat. His gaze lingered on her thin frame, her sunken cheeks, the dirt smeared across her arms. Something in his heart shifted. He had seen thousands of faces in his life, but rarely one so raw with honesty. The guards fidgeted, waiting for orders. Some expected him to drive her away, others perhaps to offer a coin out of pity. But the diplomat did neither. Instead, he crouched slightly, lowering himself to her eye level. "You could have kept it," he said quietly, his tone gentler now. "Why didn't you?" She blinked, startled by the question. Her lips parted, searching for words she barely knew how to speak. At last she whispered, "Not mine." Her voice cracked, but her conviction was steady. The diplomat felt a pang of shame. How many of his own people, grown and educated, would have done what this child just did? The crowd that had begun to gather murmured among themselves, intrigued by the sight. An alien child standing before one of the most powerful men in the city, offering back what she could have easily stolen. It was not a sight they were used to. Whispers spread quickly. Some scoffed, others softened, but all watched with growing curiosity. The girl's hands dropped to her sides, empty now, her heart pounding with uncertainty. Would he turn away? Would he punish her? Or was this moment something else entirely? He straightened and spoke a word to his guards that made them stiffen in disbelief. "Bring her inside." The girl froze, confusion and fear clashing in her wide eyes. She had expected to be turned away, perhaps with a harsh word. But being invited beyond those towering gates, that was something she had never even dreamed of. The guards hesitated, unsure, but his command was absolute. With one nod from him, they stepped aside. The child's breath caught in her throat as she realized that somehow, returning that wallet had just altered the course of her entire life. Her bare feet scraped against the smooth stone floor as she was led through the gates. The diplomat walked beside her, his pace steady but unyielding, as though he had already decided something about her fate.
She clutched at her tunic, eyes darting around the lavish hallways beyond, the likes of which she had never seen before.
Every wall gleamed with polish, every light shimmered with warmth, and for the first time in her life, she felt the overwhelming strangeness of being somewhere she truly did not belong. The diplomat glanced at her again, his expression unreadable. "What's your name, child?" She blinked, startled, and after a moment of hesitation whispered, "Sira." The name was simple, but it carried a quiet dignity. He repeated it softly, as though testing how it felt on his tongue. Then, for reasons he could not yet explain, he felt a weight inside himself shift, an unspoken decision forming in his mind. This girl was no longer just a street orphan who returned a lost wallet. She was something more. As the heavy doors closed behind them, the world outside faded into muffled whispers. Inside, Sira's journey was about to begin, though she did not yet know what awaited her. She had walked here with nothing but honesty in her hands. What she carried now, without even realizing it, was the seed of change for both herself and the man whose life she had just touched. The diplomat's office was a vast chamber filled with towering bookshelves, flickering hollow screens, and polished stone pillars. Sira sat hesitantly on the edge of a chair far too large for her tiny frame, her thin legs dangling above the floor. Her eyes darted nervously between the guard stationed near the door and the diplomat himself, who stood with his back to her, speaking softly into a communicator. She couldn't understand all of his words, but his voice carried both command and weariness, as though every decision he made pressed down on him like an invisible weight. When he finally turned toward her, his gaze softened ever so slightly. "You've lived on the streets, haven't you?" His words were more statement than question. Sira lowered her eyes, ashamed, and nodded faintly. "How long?" He pressed, though his tone lacked the sharpness of interrogation. She shifted uneasily in her seat, whispering, "Always." The simplicity of her answer struck him harder than a shouted plea ever could. She had known nothing but the cold and hunger of the streets, yet she had returned what she could have taken without consequence. A tray of food was brought in by an attendant, its aroma filling the chamber. Sira's eyes widened at the sight. Roasted meats, fresh bread, fruits glistening with juice. Her stomach clenched painfully, and she instinctively hugged herself, as though denying her own hunger. The diplomat gestured, "Eat." She hesitated, suspicious it might be a test, but when he nodded firmly again, she reached out with trembling fingers. The first bite was almost too much. Flavors she had never known exploded across her tongue, and tears pricked her eyes before she could stop them. She devoured the food with quiet desperation, though always mindful not to spill or waste a single crumb. He watched her closely, noting the careful manners hidden within her desperate hunger. She was not feral, not without thought. She carried herself with a dignity that belied her ragged clothes. "You returned my wallet," he said at last, breaking the silence. "That choice may have saved your life today." Sira froze mid-bite, her wide silver eyes darting up to him. She didn't understand fully, but the gravity in his voice made her heart race. Slowly, she lowered the bread and whispered, "I no want trouble, just give back." For the first time in years, the diplomat felt a small, genuine smile tug at his lips. "Not trouble," he said softly, "but trust." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, studying her as though she were a puzzle with missing pieces. "Sira, do you know who I am?" She shook her head, her white hair falling messily across her cheeks. "I am Edrin Valcor," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "I speak for this sector to the High Council. Many lives depend on my words." Her little brow furrowed in confusion, but she understood enough to realize he was a man who commanded power beyond her comprehension. Yet, for all his might, there was something fragile in his gaze as he looked at her. Edrin had lost much in his lifetime. Friends to betrayal, allies to politics, family to the endless grind of duty. He had forgotten what it meant to see honesty untainted. And now here sat a child who had nothing, who owed him nothing, yet had given back the one thing she could. The weight of it pressed on him in ways even war had not. The guards shifted uncomfortably, exchanging looks. One finally spoke, breaking the silence. "Sir, with respect, she's an alien orphan. She could be dangerous or simply useless. Perhaps it's best we return her to the streets." Sira's heart clenched and she instinctively shrank into herself, clutching her tunic as if bracing for rejection. But Edrin's eyes hardened, his voice suddenly like steel. "No, she will not be cast aside." The guard fell silent immediately, stunned by the finality in his tone. Sira looked up at him in disbelief, her small voice shaking. "Why?" she whispered. Edrin leaned back, folding his hands before him. "Because honesty is rarer than gold, and you have it, child. Because you remind me that not all is lost in this world." His words carried a weight she couldn't fully grasp, but she felt their warmth nonetheless. For the first time, she felt as though someone saw her not as a burden or a pest, but as something worth saving. The days that followed were strange and overwhelming. She was given clean clothes, a bed softer than anything she had ever known, and food at regular hours instead of scavenging scraps. At first, she slept curled in a ball, expecting to be thrown out at dawn. But each morning, she awoke to find it was real. Her new reality had not vanished like a dream. Still, she wandered the halls cautiously, afraid of angering someone or breaking rules she did not yet know. Edrin often found her standing quietly by the windows, gazing at the city beyond. "Do you miss the streets?" he asked one evening. She shook her head quickly, then hesitated. "Streets. Cold hungry, but—" Her eyes fell and her voice softened. "Streets, mine. Only thing I know." He considered her words carefully. Uprooting someone, even from hardship, was not as simple as providing comfort. It required something deeper, a sense of belonging. And that, he realized, was what she lacked most. Whispers began to spread through the city. People spoke of the alien child who had been taken in by the great Edrin Valcor. Some mocked him, others praised his compassion, but all were curious. Was she a symbol of hope in a fractured society, or merely a passing charity project? Rumors twisted her story into something larger than life, though she herself remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing outside the walls. To her, it was still about one thing. She had done what was right, and for once it had changed her fate. Late one night, Edrin found her asleep in the library, curled up between the shelves with a book she couldn't even read resting against her chest. He lifted it gently and draped a cloak over her fragile frame. As he watched her sleep, something stirred deep inside him. She wasn't just a child he had chosen to protect. She was a chance at redemption for himself. A reminder that even in a world clouded with greed and corruption, one small act of honesty could spark change. But even as peace settled in those quiet moments, shadows were gathering. There were those who saw Sira not as a symbol of hope, but as a threat, a disruption to the careful balance of power. And soon both she and Edrin would learn that a single honest act could ripple outward into consequences neither of them could have foreseen. The diplomat's mansion was unlike anything Leora had ever seen. Gilded arches rose into ceilings painted with constellations, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine, filtered by machines that kept the temperature steady. She clutched the folded blanket tight, her bare feet unsure against the polished marble floors, afraid one wrong move might shatter the dream and send her back into the streets where hunger gnawed and shadows mocked her. Riven walked beside her with a steady calm, his long stride softened so she could keep pace. He had dismissed his guards at the door, surprising them with a single raised hand, leaving just the two of them in that echoing space. Leora's heart pounded louder than her footsteps, a rhythm of fear and wonder colliding as she tried to absorb the idea that this world, his world, was suddenly offering her shelter. They reached a sitting chamber lined with towering bookshelves and glass walls opening to an inner garden. Riven gestured for her to sit, but she hovered near the edge of a chair, spine stiff, unsure if she was worthy of touching anything in this polished space. He noticed her hesitation, knelt down so their eyes were level, and asked if she was hungry. The question shattered her composure. Her lips quivered before she nodded once, fighting tears she didn't want to show. Servants entered quietly, carrying trays of food, bowls of steaming broth, warm bread, and small fruits glowing with color. Leora's senses reeled at the smells. She had never been so close to abundance. But when the plates were placed before her, she hesitated again, staring at her hands, ashamed of the dirt beneath her nails, afraid the first bite might prove this was just a trick of her starving imagination. Riven broke the bread himself, placing half on her plate and taking the other half for himself. He bit into it, chewed, and nodded to her like an equal sharing a meal. Only then did she allow herself to eat. The first mouthful sent warmth through her veins, her body trembling as though every cell was waking from a long slumber. Tears slid down her cheeks silently as she continued. Not from sadness, but from the strange relief of being allowed to exist without struggle, if only for a moment. When the plates were cleared, Riven asked her name again, gently, wanting to hear it from her lips. She whispered Leora, and this time the syllables carried more strength, less like a broken secret and more like something she was reclaiming. He repeated it softly, almost reverently, promising that in his house, her name would never be forgotten or twisted into mockery again. As the evening stretched, Riven shared pieces of his own past, how he, too, had once known hunger as a child in a war-torn province before fate lifted him into politics. He spoke not with pride but with honesty, admitting that his own survival had depended on others showing mercy. Leora listened with wide eyes, the distance between diplomat and street orphan shrinking with every word. But outside the mansion walls, rumors were spreading. Whispers carried through alleys and markets that a powerful man had taken in a street alien girl. Some said it was scandal, others claimed it was strategy, and a few saw it as hope. The story twisted with every retelling until it reached ears who despised the thought of aliens being anything but disposable. That night, while Leora lay curled in a bed softer than clouds, shadows gathered at the mansion gates. Men cloaked in resentment muttered about betrayal, their fists clenched around crude weapons. They saw not a child saved, but a threat brought too close to power, a seed of change they wanted uprooted before it could grow. Inside, Leora dreamed of her mother's voice, faint and broken, telling her to keep walking, to never give up. She awoke to the soft hum of security drones outside her window, unaware that they were already recording the restless movements beyond the walls. Somewhere deep inside she knew peace would not last, but for that night she held on to it like a fragile flame. Riven stood by his window in another wing of the house, staring out into the city lights. His instincts as a diplomat warned him of the storm that was building, but his heart told him this was a battle worth fighting. He had seen too much suffering to turn away now. In Leora, he saw not just a child, but the mirror of all humanity's failures and its last chance at redemption. He called his aide in the dead of night, instructing preparations for tomorrow's council session. He would present Leora's act not as charity, but as proof that compassion could bridge the gulf between species. His voice hardened with conviction. This was not about a wallet, but about rewriting the way his world measured worth. The aide hesitated, warning him that such a move could destroy his career, alienate his allies, and make him the target of fury. Riven simply replied that if his career could not withstand defending a child's dignity, it was not worth having at all. For the first time in years, his words carried fire instead of calculated restraint. In the silence that followed, Riven closed his eyes and remembered the way Leora had looked at him, fearful yet hopeful, fragile yet unbroken. That gaze had etched itself into him like a vow. Tomorrow the world would hear her story. Whether they listened or not, he would make sure it could never again be erased. The council chamber loomed like a coliseum, filled with rows of sharp-eyed delegates draped in silks and armor. Murmurs rippled as Riven entered, his presence commanding silence without a word. Behind him, Leora walked hesitantly, her small figure dwarfed by the marble columns and the sea of powerful men and women staring down at her. The weight of their gaze pressed on her shoulders, but she kept moving, clutching her tunic like a shield. Whispers hissed through the chamber. An alien child? What is he doing? This is absurd. Some sneered openly, others leaned forward with curiosity. To them she was either a scandal or a spectacle. But Riven's face betrayed no hesitation. He guided Leora to stand beside him, one steady hand resting lightly on her shoulder, grounding her against the tide of scrutiny. When the assembly finally hushed, Riven's voice rang out, deep and unwavering. Yesterday I lost something valuable. A child, homeless, hungry alien, could have kept it. She could have vanished into the alleys with more wealth than she'd ever known. Instead, she returned it. She chose honesty over survival. He let the words hang, watching them settle like stones in water. Tell me, esteemed council, how many among us would have done the same? The silence that followed was heavy. Delegates shifted in their seats, some scoffing, others unable to meet his gaze. The story was simple, but its truth struck deeper than elaborate speeches ever could. Riven pressed on, his tone sharpening. We write laws, we draft treaties, we debate endlessly about morality. Yet here stands a child with nothing, no wealth, no power, no home, who lived the principle we only pretend to honor. Leora's eyes darted nervously across the room, her small frame trembling under the magnitude of attention. But when Riven gently nodded to her, she found the courage to whisper a single phrase in broken human speech. Not mine. The words echoed louder than they should have, pure in their simplicity. The chamber erupted, some gasping, others scoffing, a few clapping cautiously. A rival delegate rose sharply, his voice dripping with disdain. You parade a beggar before us as if she is the measure of civilization. She is nothing but a mouth to feed, a burden we did not ask for. His words cut like knives and Leora flinched, but Riven stepped forward, his glare silencing the man mid-sentence. No, he said firmly. She is the measure of what we have lost. If compassion and honesty are burdens, then perhaps it is we who are unfit to lead. The chamber trembled with debate, voices clashing like swords. Some demanded the child be turned away. Others argued that her act symbolized the possibility of unity. For hours, the council roared. Through it all, Riven stood unshaken, his hand never leaving Leora's shoulder, his voice returning again and again to the same truth, that hope was not a theory, but a choice made by the smallest, most powerless among them. When the session ended, no final verdict had been reached, but the tide had shifted. People in the galleries whispered differently now, their tones tinged with admiration rather than scorn. News would spread beyond these walls, twisting into legend, and once released, it could never again be contained. The child who returned the wallet would not be forgotten. That evening, as they left the chamber, Leora clung to Riven's sleeve. Her voice was fragile, almost drowned by the noise of the crowd. They hate me, she whispered. He knelt, meeting her silver eyes, and answered with a calm fierceness. Some do, but others now believe because of you. You have given them no excuse to ignore what is right. His words lit a small, flickering fire inside her chest. Outside, the streets buzzed with 1,000 murmurs. Some spat at the sight of her. Others pressed forward with gifts, but all watched her with a fascination she could not comprehend. To Leora, it was overwhelming. To Riven, it was proof that change had begun. Every rumor, every retelling would chip at the walls dividing species, until the story of a child's honesty became something greater than politics. That night, when she lay once more in her soft bed, she whispered to herself the truth she had lived by. Not mine. But this time, she added another word, one she had never dared claim before. Home. For the first time in her fragile life, she believed she had one. Riven stood at the window of his chamber, looking out over the city bathed in moonlight. His decision had already made enemies, but it had also given birth to a symbol more powerful than any speech he had delivered. In saving one small alien girl, he had begun to save something far greater, the soul of his people. And in the silence between heartbeats, he realized she had saved him too.